Open up the DSCA's Greenspace Committee meeting, and for this meeting, and our primary purpose of this meeting was to review the latest updates on the city's green building policy plans. And with that, introduce Jeff Vredenburg from the city's sustainability manager and coordinator, and to let him then go through and provide the presentation and gather input to that. I know we have interest in many other environmental programs under our entire green space activities. So if there's other questions at the end, but let's try initially have, after Jeff go through his presentation, to focus in on the green building issues. And then if there's other city sustainability questions, if Jeff has time, we can discuss those too. So.
Great, thank you.
Then Jeff, let me open it up to you and let you take it from there and do the introductions as you had planned there. And again, as we had discussed, maybe a little bit of background as to how this fits into the program today and your overall the process here.
Great, yes, no problem. Let me just share my screen here and make this full size. Again, yes, Jeff Vredenburg, City Sustainability Coordinator, and I'm very excited to be able to present this green building policy proposal to y'all. As a little background, the City Sustainability Office has been working on this project for about 3 years. It started with a commission-driven initiative to drive some greenhouse gas reductions, a report that was written, and then eventually we got a consultant on board to help us do that. So I want to go through the progress to date, how we got to where we are, review the policies, specifically tailor the discussion to impact of this group and downtown, and then also take some questions at the end. And then I think we'll probably have a little bit of time to just open it up in general for general sustainability program questions. And I could go over a couple programs that I'm involved in as well. So, I prepared these slides, but I don't like slides just being read off. So I'm going to use it just as a little, crux for me to know what's next. But I believe that they were sent out as a pre-read as well. So hopefully you're able to see them. And if you weren't, feel free to take a look at them at the end. But I'd like this to be more of a discussion. So if you do have questions, feel free to interrupt. I don't think I can fit everybody on my screen and see the presentation. So feel free to just say, hey, just a real quick question. And we can have a little discussion, especially with a small group like this. I think that works pretty well. So I just want to frame the discussion just a little bit more. Sustainability at the city is in the planning department. That's as of about 1.5 years ago. Before that, we were in the city manager's office, but I'd say it works pretty well in the planning department just because we do a lot of comprehensive plan strategies and kind of, work with a lot of other departments on, specifically for me, environmental policy, but there's a lot of other planning that goes on that I'm sure most of you are aware of. Comprehensive plan strategy has supported green building initiatives and actually calls out us to have goals moving forward. And in 2003, we set a 35% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2025, which we're actually above already. And then to know that number, we conduct greenhouse gas inventory reports to track the amount of emissions that we have. And we're actually down about 40% between 2003 and 2018. The majority of that, though, is due to FPL, the local utility company, cleaning up their grid, transitioning away from coal and to natural gas, and now some solar. So all good things, but not as much that the city can do because we're so reliant on them. And so the Sierra Club actually approached the city starting in about 2017 to petition us to adopt a Ready for 100 goal, which was a goal to reduce our energy use derived from fossil fuels, and then go to renewable energy, zero carbon sources. And we have 2 tiers of this goal. The first one is for municipal operations, which is 100% by 2030. And then we have a community-wide, so everything in the city, transportation, waste, energy, et cetera, by 2045. So obviously, huge goal. We're only at a couple percent now. We've got a long way to go. But because it was such a big goal, we convened a working group with some grassroots organizations, city staff, and wrote a report. We wrote the Ready for 100 report and ranked strategies to achieving this goal. And the number 2 ranked strategy was implement a stronger green building code. And so that was kind of the impetus to start going down this path. The commission unanimously approved this plan and this goal in 2018 and directed me to bring back a green building recommendation. So we started looking at LEED or some other programs and got a lot of pushback from the community. And so we thought that it would be best to bring on a specific green building consultant. And so you see the bottom left of these slides is South Face. They're based out of Atlanta, but as soon as we brought them on about 16 months ago, they opened up an office here in Sarasota. And so they've been with me during the majority of the steps of this specific process and have helped and are helping take this all the way through commission. We have 2 big policies that we're going to be introducing, and then there's some smaller steps in that. But South Face, we had a task force, went to a bunch of local building associations and some independent associations just to get their input. Sent out the survey that I know many of you probably saw come through, and all of that pulled in to allow us to arrive where we are today. We're still looking towards having a little bit more input. If you have suggestions, Marlon has directed me to go to pretty much every group that you can see in Sarasota, and I'm trying to get this presentation before them just to hear what people have to say and maybe do some last minute tweaks of what the program will be before we start doing our one-on-ones with commissioners, which should be sometime next month, late next month. So end of July, beginning of August. And then hopefully that'll set us up for a September commission meeting discussion or 2 to implement this program and have a vote before November elections. And then we'd have to start over with new commissioners. So obviously we're under a little time crunch there. And then we also have a time crunch on our consultant schedule. So we only have them for about 18 months. So trying to get it all under the gun, as you know, things can move slowly in city government. So going to that. All right. So that's how we got to where we are now. Before I get into the specific policies, keep in mind that these policies were developed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and align with the Ready for 100 goals, improve local building stock energy efficiency, which also goes to the first goal, create jobs, maximize public health benefits, advance equity, and then enhance the total affordability of housing, not just the cost of the initial purchase or lease, but also that energy savings can be passed on to owners or leasees over the course of this building. So policies, we call them building performance standard, which is phase 1 and phase 2, and then time of lease, time of sale. And importantly, the building performance standard, phase 1 and phase 2, those are for existing commercial buildings. And then the time of lease, time of sale will cover almost all buildings, commercial and residential, except for the smallest commercial buildings in town. So I'll get into a little bit more specifics now. So building performance standard, phase 1. If you've heard of benchmarking, that's what this policy is, performance analysis, tracking data. So one way that you can think of this is if you've bought a car and you see a miles per gallon, or if you have bought an Energy Star refrigerator, they have a rating system that rates them compared to other buildings or cars or refrigerators of the same type. So this measures the energy and water performance over time against similar buildings. So we're not going to be comparing hospitals to small commercial spaces. We're going to be comparing hospital to hospital all over the country, or similar size schools to similar size schools. That way you have a better control over what that energy use is per square foot. And so there's a well-developed standard for this, and a well built out way that we are going to do this. So basically it's the first phase is going to be providing education to building owners and helping them apply their knowledge of their specific building, upload that to a database, and then that database will automatically compare their building to other buildings of the same size and type. And so this, we find that around the nation, just tracking data, you can have a 2 to 3% decrease in energy use just because people find things that they didn't know. Maybe there was a meter that they weren't sure that they had, or, a leaky faucet that was constantly costing them money and they hadn't checked it in, 5 years. And so just, although it doesn't seem like this has any direct implications for energy efficiency, this knowledge, one, provides some increase, and then two, sets us up for the next step, which I'll get to in a second. So this, the data that we're going to be putting into Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is the data tracking tool, property information, so size, location, measurements, energy and water usage, optionally the volume of waste, and then that all spits out a number. And so how it works is you'd have a building, that building might say it's a, Booker Middle School. Booker Middle School, they say they're 20,000 square feet. They're 20,000 square feet. They're going to compare that building to other size schools of that size, and they'll get a score. If their score is 95%, that means that they're better than 95% of middle schools that size. So that means they would only have 5% to go to be top of their class. That's going to not trigger too much of the phase two, which would be improvements, because they're already so high up. If, however, they got a 15% score, that means that 85% of schools are more energy efficient and water efficient than they are. And so it might trigger phase two, which I'll get into a little bit more of those specifics, but it would trigger them to try to get from 15% to maybe 35%. And then 20 years later, as the program phases in, we'll have higher and higher regulations so that they can be more and more efficient. There's a lot of specifics to phase two. So phase one, that's just data tracking. After about 5 years of data collection, just because we want a really good baseline, and also we want to have a high compliance rate so that we're not just comparing one or two buildings, we will implement phase two. Now, phase two, like I was saying, takes the lowest performing buildings and mandates that they improve their performance. And so this will be based on kind of a analysis of what's going on in the city as it relates to all these buildings nationwide, and then take the lowest performing buildings and improve them, trying to improve kind of the lowest hanging fruit. So this is just kind of getting into some of the details, but one big pushback that we've had is for people that are already in really efficient buildings. One thing that we want to make sure is that if you're in a building that's already, top quintile, that you're not penalized for already being in such a great position. And so there won't be as much of a demand for you to increase your energy performance because you're already outperforming, 80+% of buildings in the city in that category. But if you're in the bottom quintile or quartile, then we're going to ask you to, improve more, just because there's so many things, if you're in a really low performing building, there are relatively easy to do and economical things, replacing light bulbs, increasing the seal of your envelope, etc., to get into a higher percentage. So that's one way that we're dealing with making sure that we're really getting for that low hanging fruit to move this as much as we can. Another important thing is that this is only commercial properties that are 25,000 square feet and above. So small commercial properties will not be impacted by this. And that's to address that the smaller commercial properties have varied uses, and it's not so easy to benchmark them. There could be a one 10,000 square foot property that seemingly on the books in Portfolio Manager would be similarly rated to another one, but one might have a really high energy use intensity because they're working there 48 hours or 24 hours a day or something like that. So we're really trying to move the needle writ large. And so a large percentage of the square footage, I believe it's almost 70%, are covered by buildings, and that about 70% of buildings space in the city are covered in 25,000 square feet buildings and above. So we're really trying to get the biggest piece of the pie with that. And you know, here we have a sub-consultant that's working on this project to help us understand the actual impacts of these programs. The last thing that we want to do is implement a program that's not going to actually move the needle and have a big impact. By 2035, we're estimating that we'll have almost $32 million in bill savings passed on to people paying energy bills. This is just in the city. Almost 200,000 tons of carbon dioxide avoided, $7.5 million of public health benefit, 50 net local jobs, most of which would probably be energy auditors, and then, you know, more than 50 million gallons of water savings. So these are all very tangible benefits that are, you know, helping us move that needle for our Ready for 100 goals. This is just kind of an example that this, you know, as this program and phase 2 continue, it allows us to be flexible with how we have building improvements, right? If there's a major technological advance in way buildings are built, we'll be able to go back and say, all right, these lowest, you know, the lowest third of buildings, there's this new easy technology, let's try to implement that. So it gives us these checkpoints where we can keep saying, all right, let's get better and better as we keep going. So that's the first policy, which is kind of divided into two. The second policy is a time of lease and time of sale energy performance disclosure. So this is any time a building is sold, any time a building is leased, and this is commercial and residential, that we're asking for, during that transaction, 1 year of energy data and the energy use intensity to be given to the person that's leasing or the person that's buying. And the goal of this is to really just have people think about energy, think about how, you know, even though a condo or a house or a commercial space might be cheaper than some others, maybe that cheapness is made up in less efficient utilities and appliances and building envelope. And so we're really trying to get people to think about energy efficiency and how that utility bill is paid. And so there's a big equity implication for this as well. And of course, this policy won't be directly for new buildings either, just because new buildings, they don't have that year or two of energy data as they track going forward. So this will take into effect after a building's been built for a little bit and we have that data, and then we will be able to track it. So like I said, this is for everything, basically 10,000 square feet and above for commercial and all multifamily. And I didn't mention this before, but all these phases are phased in. Nothing will be starting directly now. We want to start with city buildings and then municipally owned buildings, and then increase that as we go, starting with the largest buildings, just because largest buildings tend to have the most building management kind of knowledge. And so it's easier for a giant 60,000 square foot building to say, all right, this is the energy use intensity, because they're used to tracking that. Whereas, you know, a mom and pop's building probably is just run by a couple people that maybe don't have that same knowledge that a building manager might have. So all of these programs are phased in, starting with the largest and then working to smaller and smaller buildings, which also allows the city to conduct education, you know, starting with the fewer biggest buildings and then going to smaller and smaller buildings as we progress. So yeah, there, you know, this has some pretty big impacts as well. We've seen 8 to 10 year cycles for sales and a 2 to 3 year cycle for leases in the city. So, you know, we'll be having more people see this on leases than sales originally, but as we're in it longer and longer, it'll be in, you know, all of these transactions. And just some pro cons here, more information to understand the total affordability, and then the city will have some information on the performance of building stock as well. Here is the phased in timeline that we're proposing. So sometime this year, work on getting city buildings into benchmarking and working on data aggregation, hiring somebody, because obviously this is going to take a little bit of lifting from the city's point of view, just to education and tracking some of this data. And then as we go through benchmark with some new buildings and then start at 50,000 or 50,000 feet commercial multifamily buildings. And then as we progress and have compliance steps, go to smaller and smaller buildings in the future. Oh, this is just what I was talking about earlier, how, for example, commercial buildings, 50,000 square feet, it's almost 60% of the buildings. And if you add 25,000 square feet in there, we're almost to 75 or 70% of the total sector square feet for commercial buildings. So we're really trying to get the majority of square footage. And that's a threshold that we don't have to go to too many buildings in the city. All right, that's what I got. Any questions? Happy to take any feedback, questions, etc. I'll stop sharing my screen. And then if you do have questions on specific slides, I can go back to one.
Yeah, I have some questions, but I would like to open up here. Mary, Haber, please.
Jeffrey, I have a question. Most of us here are in condo buildings.
Mm-hmm.
We own individual units. I'm in a condo building with over 200 units. Would my condo building increase the efficiency of the common areas? Or would we individually in our apartments increase the energy efficiency? How does this get measured?
So condos and multifamilies are a little bit tricky, as you've pointed out, because one, for multifamily that are all sharing different meters, it's difficult. FPL doesn't want to share individual data, and even getting them to share aggregated data can be a little bit difficult. And so it's similar with condos, because everybody has their own private accounts. FPL won't share a individual, individualized or even data aggregate information for that specific building. They've been very reluctant to do that. And so we have clauses in there that if we can't get a data aggregate as a general like that, that there's going to be an exception. And so that would be more of an education-based thing that hopefully we would have a voluntary compliance. But if we can't get that data, then we're not going to be mandating that people do it, just because it's almost impossible to get that. We would hope that condo buildings, in their general areas would be able to improve this. And it's a good point that maybe we should put some language in there that general condo building areas that are not owned by specific entities or specific owners, that's kind of a separate cutout for the benchmarking program, BPS, and then obviously not time of lease, time of sale. So that's a good point, Maria.
I'm sorry, how do you mean condominiums not owned by the people that work there, live there?
No, I mean, so the building owns the public space areas, right?
No. The condominiums are by declaration owned by all of the owners of that property, of any individual units. They have a shared interest in the common property, and then specific interest in their own units, and then some limited common elements, et cetera. There's 3 tiers. And so when you said you talked to building owners, the building owners of our condominium are the 180 or however many unit owners. They hire a property manager who hires people that do various services. So that's where it's a little confusing how you would expect condominiums to participate in this.
So who pays the electricity for those common spaces? Everybody gets a small bit of that.
We pay it through our assessments. The checks are written on the condominium account. It's signed by usually a president or somebody who is an owner. President of the organization, who is elected by the owners there. Even commercial condominiums, the commercial spaces, they have to have the owners are the commercial owners. Now you have a few buildings in town like the Mart, 100 Central, 50 Central. Those have dual residential and retail, and that's a different kind of animal there too. So complex.
Right, it's complex. And yeah, so I think, I think the way that we would address that is how many meters are on those common areas that are owned by everybody? So there's one building meter paid for that?
I would assume maybe depends on how that building is actually laid out and how they, ran the electrical lines to begin with. But typically, yeah, your office, common area, social rooms, et cetera, would be on a common on a common electrical meter, I would assume, yes.
Right. So I think that if the, association writ large, which has most likely a building manager, they would be able to share what that is, right? And be able to benchmark that space. That space then.
If the board of directors of that condominium so elects to provide that information.
Right.
And as we have found through our own survey processes, that we have condominiums whose boards did not want to release almost any information about their condominium operation. So that's not going to be an easy hurdle, at least from our experience here of trying to work with condominiums to get access to information and the processes they go through. The hired property manager cannot simply give out that information to unless approved by their board.
Right. And I would say that's a very similar process to FPL in a multifamily, right? They don't want to give out their specific information. It's trademark information. And so that's why we've carved out some exceptions, because if we can't get the information, we're not going to be able to mandate, an improvement because we don't know what it is. And so I think, in a condo building that is not electing to do that, we would just not be able to. On the other hand, the time of lease, time of sale would get to that a little bit, although we wouldn't be tracking the entire building data. Anytime one of those condos were up for sale, or if it were to be leased to somebody, if that were possible in the building, there would be a disclosure of that specific condo. That answer your question, Maria, in a roundabout way?
Yes, it does. And I can also see why some buildings don't want to release it. They may be afraid that it gets compared to other buildings and that they wind up to have currently a lower energy efficiency than other buildings. It's probably complicated. I think it's a question of educating the building owners and then, of course, also the board of directors, that in the long run, this really helps everybody. And in the short run, the numbers in the, I'm sure, David, you are a fabulous numbers guy. You can put these together, and there will be people, and including Jeffrey, who can say this can be done. In the long run, it's going to serve not only the planet, but you financially too, who are in the building. In the short run, yes, if the building is really not energy efficient, buyers may or may not look at this. The condos already may be lower priced than in more efficient buildings.
Could I say something?
There are a lot of questions.
Go ahead, Judy.
Hi, I don't have a question, just something to let you know. We have a condominium in Syracuse, and every month I get from National Grid, who is the parallel to FPL, I get a report with bar graphs that says this is how your energy usage compares with similar size units in your particular territory, region, whatever it is. So there's an average. There's where my unit is. It's below or above average. And so it's very clear to me how much energy I'm using compared to what others near me are also using for a comparable space. And I get a report, you've gone up X percent, you've gone down Y percent. It's very specific. So is this plausible for Sarasota? And I don't know how National Grid does this. I mean, I don't know the technology behind it, but it's pretty helpful. Oh, when we when we leave our condominium, we put that thermostat up or down, depending on what it is we're trying to achieve. We turn off the hot water heater. We do all these things, and we get to see the effects of these steps that we've taken in that bar graph that comes every month.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, FPL, I don't have any jurisdiction over them. I would hope that they would move to something with that. And they do, if you look at your FPL bill, you can go to their energy dashboard and it shows you your tracked changes over the year. But I don't believe that it compares you to other similarly sized or formatted buildings. Maybe they would want to do that. And we obviously have a lot of continued conversations with them. They're well aware of what we're proposing with this project. And, I will say that the Energy Star portfolio manager does have some comparison charts like that. You have to, especially for your individual unit, that data tracking involves you putting that information in instead of the utility. I would love if we had a partnership with the utility to do that. It's not here yet, but we can hope that it will be in the future. And I'm curious, I wonder if that was just a choice based on the utility up there, or if that might be a mandate by Syracuse or something like that. Because we have seen some cities mandate that they do that, but we haven't elected to go in that path so far.
I don't know, which it's only happened for the last 5 or so years. National Grid took over from Niagara Mohawk. National Grid is British owned, I believe, and they are the major energy provider, I think, throughout the Northeast. And the language that is used seems to imply that they're doing this, for your good. We want to help you save energy, etc. But who knows? It might be they're just trying to put a rosy glow on something they'd rather not do. But it would seem to me FPL could talk to National Grid, and they probably already have some sort of association type contact or, arrangement. So I don't know how much leverage you have with saying to FPL, have you looked at other energy providers to see how they report on energy usage by size of unit?
Great feedback.
Yeah, David, please go.
Yeah, hey, Jeff, natural gas prices are increasing significantly. And so, and I assume FP&L rates, that's regulated, but they can be adjusted. Is that annually? What's the procedure for, let's just say, individual residential units as far as FP&L adjusting rates?
So FP&L to change their rates, the rates are set by the Public Service Commission, PSC. Right. And so they have to go through a rate change at the PSC, which they actually did about 8 months ago and pushed through about a 22% increase in rates. And one of the reasons if you've seen any of FPL's advertisements, they advertise some of the lowest rates, and it's true, we have some of the lowest energy rates in the country. And that's because they haven't raised the rates in a while. And so we're kind of catching back up to a time where they're going to start raising the rates more, I can foresee. Obviously, I don't speak for them, but I know that they put a 20% increase in last year. And they've been talking about putting more rate increases due to, increased natural gas and other things too. So we're going to see some increases. So
my question is, when you set your goals, are you setting monetary goals or kilowatt hour goals? Because the difficulty, of course, is setting monetary goals when you don't know what the rates are going to be moving forward.
Yeah, so our goals are based on percentages of the mix of energy that we consume in the city. So when we say 100%, we mean we don't want any of our electricity to come from natural gas. We don't want any of our electricity to come from coal. And in fact, we don't want any of our transportation to be based on internal combustion engines.
Would you say that another way? So you want everything solar? Is
solar,
renewable?
Yes, renewable. Another way we say we want to have all of the energy consumed in the city to be from renewable sources of energy.
Okay. One other unrelated question. Streetlights. I became intrigued or interested in streetlights for design reasons some years ago. And I remember exchanging an email with Stevie at the time.
Yep.
And I believe her estimate was 28% of the city's electric bill was streetlights.
Yep.
I don't, if it's plus or minus a few percent from that, it doesn't matter, but that's a big percentage. Talk to us about opportunities and for energy savings with bulb replacements or whatever.
Yeah, so that number is still, as of last year, true. And I know that because the city municipal operations has signed on to FPL's Solar Together program, where we purchase credits from energy that's derived from solar that FPL has been putting in. So we have about, it's like 23%, or yeah, 23%. Doesn't include that because those are our unmetered accounts, which basically means streetlights. So we've got a couple of programs in the works. One, FPL, and we're working with them to change our high pressure sodium bulbs to LED bulbs. And so we basically pay a percentage or a set number, set either per streetlight or per hours that the streetlight is on, that we calculate on average for every streetlight in the city. And we actually pay less if it's an LED bulb as opposed to the old high pressure sodium, because the LED bulbs use quite a bit less energy. So we're saving money, reducing our energy costs going to those bulbs. And then we have some small programs, for example, Ben Franklin Drive out on Lido. We're doing a solar powered streetlight program, putting in about, I forget the total number, I think it's about 320 streetlights. And they have a 5-day battery backup and solar panels on each individual light. So, we learned our lesson during Hurricane Irma that it was pretty dark out there for a few days because the energy, a lot of the power lines were damaged underground going over there. And so this will provide a backup. So you have a resiliency, safety implications, plus they're not tied to the grid whatsoever. And so once those are installed, they're there for not pulling electrons from the grid whatsoever. And
But
so
back on the switch out of the old technology bulbs to LED,
Yep.
is that, have half the city's lights been already converted, or?
I don't actually know the percentage. I would say we're probably about 20 to 25%, but I haven't heard an update on that for a while. I don't deal with that specifically. I've dealt with the policy and asked FPL and reminded them of these certain locations, but they basically do it in chunks. So they were focused on Newtown for a while. I think they're in Indian Beach, Sapphire Shores for a little while. So they're doing different areas, and I haven't seen what percentage it is, but I think it was a 4-year time frame from start to end, and I think we're about 2 years in. But the pandemic was in the middle of it, so we lost some time.
Okay, final question. When you say they, you mean FP&L is switching out the bulbs?
Yes, the FPL owns those streetlights.
Oh, okay. I didn't
Yep.
realize that. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from other ones out here? So Jeff, if not, go back to you said the time of sale, time of lease.
Mm-hmm.
So is the expectation that the unit owner, when he goes to sell his unit, would be providing some document that's not currently being provided?
Yes.
And what would that document look like?
It would look.
Is that one of those pages that was in the Florida Green Building Coalition, or?
No, so what I've seen so far, the best example would be if you ever filled out a radon disclosure form. So anytime there's a commercial, or I'm sorry, a residential exchange of property, there's a mandatory radon disclosure form.
Okay.
That goes. So it's just a 1-page, have you done, is there radon known in this property, et cetera. So it'd be similar, probably a 1 or 2-page thing. This is the, average bill for the last year, square foot, and that calculates an energy use intensity. So a simple form, but just something to get eyes on it.
And so help me understand, what is the incentive why unit owners, either in their sale or lease, would take the time to go through and update that information? Especially every year, if they leased it, they have to provide the latest energy data in their document for their lease. So where's the incentive for the time spent?
I would ask, where's the incentive to provide a radon disclosure, right? It's a public safety and health. That's public safety and health.
I think that's required, isn't it? Something like
It is, right? So
radon.
this would be required. And so it's just something else that's required so that the person that is buying or leasing the property has more information to make a more educated decision.
So you're planning to introduce a whole new policy that's going to have a series of requirements on it that impacts the residents in the downtown area. And this is the beginning of the process to begin to get feedback on the impact on those residents? Or what's?
No, we've been getting feedback for about 8 months on it.
From residents of buildings affected? From the list you provided, you got feedback from developers, from the building exchange, the associations for building exchange, Gulf Coast Building Exchange, and other building groups, developer groups, individual developers. I don't see where the original goals were to assist receiving community feedback on these meaningful things would have gone into the early stages, especially if you're implementing a requirement, not a suggested requirement, that's going to impact those affected stakeholders. I mean, your beginning documents talked about getting input from the stakeholders, and I would assume you get input before you put forward a series of requirements here. So can you explain how this requirement assessment and input is going to proceed here?
So I'm going to community groups like this, just as I have the surveys, et cetera. And all of this is summarized and then will be presented to commission.
Sorry. So internally, you're not taking feedback that says residents are not going to want to fill these things out and make any adjustments into your plan today, or take more time to better assess that, or to gather further input in a more detailed way to better understand that?
No, I'm not going to not take feedback. I'm taking all of this feedback. This is actually, you're the first person, and I've talked to multiple other neighborhood associations and community groups, and specifically residents, and you're the first one to bring that up. So
have you talked to anybody, groups that have high-rise condominiums?
I have not talked to high-rise condominiums yet.
Well, you know, this is the downtown area. That's what, David, 21% of the city's population. And we're now for the first time being requested. And now, as you see here, barely a handful, a half dozen or so feedback. The groups that are affected would be the, you have all your condominium property manager associations. And most all of them are members of DSCA in our associate member category. And so that's a big part of the people that are affected. The actual property managers themselves in the internal processes and what the condominiums go through to do that is a key thing. Also, you have condominiums that are assessing projects such as, say, replacing old window frames or doing other things within their condominium. And where is the help and assistance to guide them in being able to make that assessment up front in terms of what sort of things would it be achieving that better efficiency feedback? So is that anything that's being looked at too? So
yeah, part of our ask for this is for an additional employee in the city to go out and do education on that. I think that so when we've looked at other cities that have implemented programs like this, and one of the reasons that we see that there is an additional jobs that are created is because a lot of buildings would hire a auditor to come in and help them work through this process. And those energy auditors would be able to say, oh, these are your low hanging fruits. This is where you are now, and this is how you can get to the, what you need to get to.
We've had various proposals come before our condominium association over the last at least 7 or 8 years I've been involved with various proposals, some of which had to do with water gasket mechanisms in the toilets to save water from overflowing or leaking, et cetera, et cetera. But rarely are we able to get access to any real data to help a condominium board make a independent assessment of claims by various consultants, product companies, et cetera. So to me, this is a key area. I mean, I know personally, and others here have been in their condominiums where they're trying to make improvements, but that to me is where, rather than saying you got to provide us the data, how do we actually do that better is a key part.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and and that's also why we're starting with just data tracking, right? So data tracking for 5 years, then starting those improvements. So during those 5 years, there'll be lots of education out there, and hopefully a shift in local economy, so that there are more people saying, "Oh, well, look, all these people are going to want to know about this. Let's provide some education and services that will help them get to this next step."
Somebody else want to add another follow-up, David?
Jeff, what I'm trying to understand. So if I'm selling my home, you have to disclose defects, or if you got something done without a permit, or, rayon or whatever. But you're saying this simple form, I would, for example, be required to disclose my electric bill for the last year?
Yeah, it would be more of the energy use intensity, but similarly, it'd be the amount of energy used per square footage.
Okay, so somebody that is here full-time versus somebody part-time. So I live in a condominium next to Joe and Sally Smith. They're part-time, and they turn their thermostat to 82 while they're away or something like that. And I'm there and I want it at 73. So I'm going to be using, pick a number, 30% more energy than them, even though our units are comparable appliances, comparable efficiency. And is that going to be a meaningful? I don't see how that's either fair or meaningful. So
yeah, that's a really good point. This has been brought up a couple times, and I think there are a couple different ways that we could get, at least try to estimate it better. One, if you were calculating it the percentage of time, or say you're there 6 months of the year, calculate that bill for energy use intensity for the 6 months habited versus 6 months not habited, or something like that.
Okay, well, listen, I won't belabor the point, but as Patrick said, I think I think there's some fundamental issues with that path, but please explore it as you wish.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to be involved to provide more formal feedback as you get, further down the road.
Yeah, I think just a quick follow-up to that. I mean, we have done workshops with property managers and the people involved in that. And specifically I think what David was asking here is, if there's an example form that you are already working on or planning on or putting out there, that needs to be put out here in a draft stage for the stakeholders, citizens who you were trying to get input from, to comment on as to whether or not that form is feasible or not, and willingness to actually make changes or tear it up or do something different. But, and also to the point of part-time versus full-time residents, again, living in a condominiums, you can see other people with the same size units, and the temperatures they keep their units makes a significant differences too. I can look across and see units here that same size, but they keep the temperatures 10, 15 degrees lower. And you can see, frost on their glass during the day, or water forming on the glass during the daytime, versus somebody who keeps it more, say 75 versus 65, So over years, that's going to have a huge difference in the energy consumption use. Even at full-time, somebody who's sitting there with, 3 or 4 computers, 3 or 4 big screen TVs versus, widow lady who has her one little TV, sitting there. Big difference in terms of energy consumption. So that's kind of a understanding is how you put something into a perspective and a reasonable range that takes into account in this kind of environment, there are significant differences, ranges.
Yep, great point.
Jeffrey?
Yes.
Jeffrey, if you come up with questions, if you come up with a form that individual homeowners, condo owners should fill out, I'll be happy to give you that information I own 2 units in the same building. One is tenanted, one I occupied. I'm not here 100%, but I can go back several years when I was here even less. I have fabulous accountants. They can give you all the answers. So then you have one example and you can say, how long have you been there? Because if I haven't been here, I've been somewhere else. My accounts are logging down. Where else I paid for utilities, for instance. So as an example, I'll be happy to volunteer. And then you can keep improving on because on the first time, none of us get it right.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Maybe too complicated, maybe too loose or whatever. I'll work with you.
Thank you. And I'll be sure once I have, I actually was talking to the consultant South Face, and they're about done with the second draft of this form. So when I get that, I'm going to be sending a lot of information out to all the groups that I've presented to. So I'll make sure I send it to y'all. And but yeah, definitely would love with feedback and improvement. So.
Okie doke.
David?
Jeff, you mentioned that the consultant you're working with is based in Atlanta or wherever, and they're opening here. The kind of form that is being recommended, do they have experience using that in other municipalities?
They do. So Orlando has a benchmarking policy. Miami Beach does. And they've worked both of those cities on this. And then there have been other cities not in Florida, but we're really trying to, Florida has some very specific laws. Obviously, Sarasota is very touristy, whereas Atlanta doesn't have the same, makeup of people and travel, et cetera. And so we're really trying to make sure that this is tailored to the climate here and the way that people use spaces here. And so that's why we've really been pulling information from the other cities in Florida that do this. And unfortunately, there aren't that many, but fortunately, there are some that we can pull some information from. And that's why we're also, going out to groups like you and others to get this feedback. And it's extremely valuable to me. And so I really appreciate your time and considerations.
Yeah, Jeff, I have another one from, so going back in the beginning of your presentation, and I think there's something needs to be examined. You had, I think, your slide 3, your review of the successes, and you cite the 2 comprehensive plan strategies, 6.1, reduction of community-wide greenhouse gas initiatives, and 6.3, sustainability in new building and development. However, in 6.3, the portion of that action strategy is more extensive. It says for urban expansion and infill development, which is primarily what we have in the city, in downtown, the city shall use measures as outlined in the LEED for neighborhood development or alternative compliance pathway for incentives to help create more sustainable and well-connected neighborhoods. In order to do that, we have to have walkability. And the second thing is, in that assessment of the comprehensive plan, you did not include 6.10, improving air quality with urban forest. That states in the city will actively support programs and regulations that promote the benefits of canopy trees to, among other things, reducing heat island effect, which occurs with buildings. So I understand you have a limited scope and of this charter here, of this particular program you got to roll out, but my question to you is, where is the impact on the neighborhood and the sustainability of the site and the nearby walkability of that if you don't take into effect the heat island effect?
So heat island effect occurs for many things. One, lack of trees. Two, impervious cement and pavement. I mean, we can go down the list. I know that a lot of you on this call know about this.
Right. So
one reason that one thing that can add to urban heat island effect is running AC units a ton of the time, right? If you ever walk by an AC unit during the summer, or well, I guess any time in Florida, it puts off a lot of heat, right? And so having a more efficient building means that has to run less. And so that can reduce the urban heat island effect. And obviously shade trees, better designed buildings, green roofs, all of these are ways that will also impact that. But, this is a very specific carve out of ways that we've found to do this. And to call out LEED, that was the first path we went down, to go just mandate some type of LEED, silver, gold, whatever that might be in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And we got so much pushback, both from commission and from citizens, businesses, that we just kind of read the writing on the wall, and there was no way that would have passed. And so we kind of reduced our scope a little bit to something that we thought would be easier to get past. And then maybe in the future we can go to a program like that.
Okay, well, at some point in the past year, our group has met with Stevie Freeman-Montes, and there were some discussions about the city having a program that, with all the funds coming in through grants, being able to actually do measurements on some of the streets in the downtown area, specifically targeting, as an example, Rosemary, and to actually go through, and they said they had access to, or some way of getting the measuring devices to be able to do some sort of kind of heat map of the actual heat areas, and from that be able to do a better assessment of where there is an impact from those buildings, and in future programs what can be done. I mean, part of that heat island effect is not only the heat that goes down into the ground that then heats the sidewalk, but the reflective heat from the white concrete or stucco walls or whatever is there, however slick that is, and the glass, the reflective glass. And so is there things in that consideration of the building and its effect on the site, which includes the nearby sidewalks, et cetera, that should be taken into account when you're coming up with an overall plan? Because a building that does take into effect those impact conditions to its site, I think should get points for that, especially if they're planting trees nearby, between the sidewalk and the building, et cetera. I mean, David, you've had more discussions directly with developers and with city staff on those kinds of issues of the street trees and how to incentivize the developers.
Yeah, so this program is just not, it's not a point-based program like LEED.
No.
And so it's just, it's just not the purview of this program to address that. The city's working on other things for that. I can't speak to what Stevie was saying. She hasn't been in sustainability in about 2 years, so she must have a different program that she's working on that I'm not aware of. But yeah, this I would love for this program to encompass all of that, but it's just not the purview of this program.
Well, it said reducing or improving air quality. And if the street trees or the other things taken with the building help to reduce that. So you're saying the impact on the citizens from the building itself is not part of the green building program assessment here?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I think there are indirect impacts on citizens and air quality that this program definitely address. But, another way that we could reduce air quality issues is just banning internal combustion engines. But there are all sorts of ways that we don't want to do that too. So this, I'm just slicing off a little tiny part of how we can address this issue. I'd love to do a bunch more, but, would I get a 3-2 vote on something like that? Probably not. So, this program used to be a lot bigger we had a lot more things. And as we've progressed and gotten feedback from many different groups, we've cut a lot of things out because we've had a lot of people say, this is not something I would ever support. And so, that's just the way, compromise is the way of government. And the original program had mandate zero energy homes, right? So that homes was 100% zero impact on the grid. But we met with a bunch of builders and homeowners, and they said, the cost of this is going to be too much, and we don't have the technology or know how to build these homes. And so that was one of the first things that went away. Obviously, that type of program would have a huge impact on air quality and urban heat island, because a lot of them incorporate a lot of green technologies, but it's just something that, at this time, I don't think that we could get passed before commission. Unfortunately, and I would support any of those programs for sure. But as you know, some things are pie in the sky at this time.
Well, I'm sorry. I understand your point about what's politically feasible, but I was simply bringing up things that are in the city's comprehensive plan that says when you're putting together programs in this area, these are things that should be evaluated. So it's not inappropriate from the citizens' point to say, these things are in the comp plan, and in your assessment, it's appropriate to say, these matter. These things affect that. Now, whether or not you're taking on them in this phase of the program, but I think maybe to identify that the comp plan spells out these effects on that. And like I say, your own program said you were seeking citizen input on and these affected stakeholders, and this is how they're affected. So, but aside from that, I think one thing going forward, I would suggest maybe we look at is if you can get back to us on the, samples of the forms, et cetera. And David, I'll let you, David, have through our events committee, we put together workshops, et cetera, specifically targeting the property manager associations, et cetera. As members here, we do some of the larger ones, First Service Residential, et cetera, where we can engage them. In fact, we had one of their, was it First Service or Associa, had their regional environmental guy in for our workshop last month or two ago, mentioning some of the programs that they're trying to implement within condominiums statewide. So that to me is a step that I would strongly suggest that gets inserted, however long this thing needs to stretch out a little bit. But just hearing and knowing what condos go through, for instance, I know, in fact, there's a condo board meeting starting right now that on the agenda is the approval of sales and leases by the board. I don't know if every condo does it, but I know in our condo, every month, if there's a sale or lease, it has to be approved by the board. So these are the sort of processes that I think city staff would do well to begin to understand that, and then we can work with you to try and make this success. I agree. This has got some good goals, right, Mary? And so let's see how we can work the system, because it is a complex system and you need better understand that, and we'll work with you on that.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Jeff, there used to be a benchmark when you put a condo or a house on the sale for market. And that benchmark was 7 years of energy bills, energy efficiencies, what you did there, how much it cost. And in some cities, like where I lived in Washington, D.C., the real estate agents would take your what you gave them from your particular unit. They could compare it to other units in the neighborhood and to other neighborhoods. And that should be easier here in Sarasota because there aren't so many neighborhoods. But it was valuable for people that were buying something. They had some idea, okay, what is this like in the individual unit? And in the individual units, you filled out how often, you guessed, how often you were there, and what is the temperature level that you have in there. Again, a lot of it is guesswork, and it's very detailed, but people were looking at this. And I understand from a real estate agent, people do look at condo fees. And energy is in condo fees. So I think that might be an angle that would actually help to get some numbers.
Before we finish up here, a couple others been on here. I haven't heard from Jacqueline or Sue. Did either of you have any questions or comments? Been muted there. Okay. Just briefly, Jeff, was there anything else you wanted to just outline in terms of the other programs you're involved in?
Yeah, sure. I saw
Something on the
Jacqueline
website?
go off mute. I don't know if, oh, she says, oh, Sue's microphone doesn't work, she says. Okay. Yeah, if Jacqueline, did you have a question? I saw you're off mute. No, okay. I want to just highlight two other programs. One that Maria's comment just actually made me think about. So we have a partnership with Sarasota County and a couple foundations called Partners for Green Places, where we've been partnering with local environmental nonprofits, Children First, Mothers Helping Mothers, the Boys and Girls Club, et cetera. We partnered with almost 20 organizations, and we started benchmarking their, we took information of their energy bills for the last few years, looked at the total use, looked at how the building was being used, paid for energy audits of those buildings, level 2 audits, and then provided them money from city, county, and local Gulf Coast Community Foundation, Branswick Foundation, Community Foundation of Gulf Coast, and Selby to do energy efficiency upgrades free of cost for them, so that they could then reinvest money that they would have spent on utility bills or those upgrades into their programming. And so a little bit to what has been brought up here, we learned a lot about energy audits, energy efficiency, and how, in some cases, relatively small investments have provided a large impact to their operations and budget, which has been really great. And so that has informed a little bit of this process, Sarasota County, and I've worked a little bit with them on this, they have an energy efficiency program for low income households, including some of the Section 8 housing. And to the point of, some people have really, if you keep your apartment or your condo or your house really hot, as opposed to, keep it at 62 degrees, you can have a big energy change in the cost. We were going into these units and we got information from FPL or asked the owners or the renters, what is your energy bill every month? And some of these people were renting units for $600 and paying $450 in energy bills for, some of these are like 500 square foot apartments. So I don't care if you're keeping it at 65 degrees or you're keeping it at 85 degrees, it shouldn't be that much money. And so we found some major, giant holes in these attics that were just completely venting, and so you're right, there are differences in how people live and use energy, but we're hoping that, even if we average all of that out, we'll find some of these gross deficits in envelopes and things like that. And so being able to put together a form and a program and an education so that when we get to process of implementation, we can sit down with people and say, hey, look, these windows, you have a hole in this window, or, some of these people, their fridges, the gasket on the fridges weren't there anymore. And that's just, a very quick, easy fix. But if you don't know, that, you're constantly having food spoilage and just wasting so much electricity. And so both of those programs have really helped us learn some of how this will go into the future as we do education and continue to work with that. And so I just wanted to highlight those two programs. Obviously, we have a lot of else going on. I do, in addition to education for programs like this, I speak at community groups, neighborhood associations, schools. I do a lot of talks on recycling and on what that is. So if any of you ever want somebody to come speak about sustainability, recycling, et cetera, at any other groups, I happy to come and do, 20-minute presentation, 30-minute presentation to anything like that. So a lot of what I do is education and outreach as well as policy implementation. So really appreciate your time. I will get you those forms and follow up on some of these questions. And you haven't heard the last from me, which is how it should be.
Right. No, we appreciate working with you on that. Just to let folks know, and we talked with you, Jeff, on this, that on our next DSCA board meeting coming up here on July 6th, we have Tracy Troxler, the executive director of the Sunshine Community Compost, talking about composting programs. And so that'll be coming up next on July 6th for that meeting coming up there. So folks, stay tuned for that, and we hope you will come to that. If there's any other questions or feedback, then please send us an email and we'll forward it on. Or Jeff, I think your information was there. We'll make it available. So thank you again very much. David, anything final from you?
Nope. Appreciate
Okay.
the time, Jeff. Thank you.
All
Appreciate
right.
your time. Thank you.
Everyone have a great day. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Jeff.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.